And this thing is not completely straight because it's just annoying. I just get annoyed at 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 YouTube. So anyway, glory to God. Um, it doesn't matter. You're right, Deb. Uh, so how did I become Orthodox? That was the only question I received this month. I was in my last year at Wheaton College near Chicago, studying literature and theology. And I had two classes that were particularly influential. One was a modern European literature class, for which we were reading the Brothers Karamazov, among other novels. And I was simultaneously taking a class in historical theology. Good evening, Ian. Glad you could make it. I'm just telling my story of coming to Orthodoxy. So for those who are just arriving, um, so first in the class on historical theology, it was the first time I had kind of, as a Protestant, high church, Anglican, but still a Protestant, first time I considered Christianity historically, or taken it seriously, uh, looking at the first 1500 years of Christianity. So when I did that and came to kind of appreciate the Catholic arguments, and then learning about the Orthodox Church, which continues to be not obviously as well known as the Catholic Church, that had a large effect on me, profound impact on my thinking about Christianity. But I would say that reading the Brothers Karamazov was at least as important, if not more important, in encountering someone that I kind of considered the first true Christian I'd ever met. Obviously didn't meet him in real life. He's a fictional character based on a Russian saint. But Elder Zosima in the Brothers Karamazov made a deep impression on me, as he has on many others who Dostoevsky helped come to Orthodoxy. So, reading the Brothers Karamazov, I would say, was at least as important, if not more important, than theology, or the kind of historical argument for Orthodoxy. And then a friend invited me to church. It was the eve of my birthday, and we went out for coffee, and he invited me the next day to church. And that was pretty much it. I never looked back. I became Orthodox probably more quickly than I would recommend. In my case, it turned out well, but it was quite quick. And then after I graduated, I had the opportunity to go to England and spend time at the monastery of St. Sophrony in Essex, in England. Unfortunately, he had reposed prior to my being there, but his spirit was very strong still, and continues to be a wonderful monastery. And if anyone goes to England, I highly recommend making the pilgrimage there. And then I went from there to Greece, where I did my graduate work, and I would live there for 8 years. So that's my story. I could go into more detail. Reading The Way of a Pilgrim was very important. I would say a turning point as well. After reading that, I think it was very clear that I was going to become Orthodox. But it's interesting, that book had a profound influence on me, and I know on many others, but some people don't have the same experience. So anyway, it's interesting. So that's the briefer version of my coming to Orthodoxy. So we're a few more people have shown up. Again, apologize for portrait mode. Somehow I got stuck in it, and YouTube will not let me go into landscape mode. So even though the phone's been in landscape mode the entire time as I brought it up. So Anyway, it's hard to believe that they don't provide an easy fix to that, but there we are. Anyway, I am going to continue reading from Father Seraphim Rose, Super-Correctness, chapter 63, and I'll discuss it a little bit, and we'll go for a half hour or so, and if people have questions, I'm open to them. We'll see if I continue to do the Q&A. It's a nice time to connect with people, and that's probably why I do it more than anything. It doesn't end up being much of a Q&A. It's mostly me just reading and talking about what I'm reading, but hopefully there's something useful there, and we'll see. But if you have the book, it's page 526 that we're starting on. You can find it online if you want to follow along at orthodoxinfo.com, or you could probably just Google Father Seraphim Rose, Super-Correctness, and a link to Orthodox Info should come up, chapter 63. You could also type that into Google. So if you want to follow along, this section starts with Father Seraphim in right there in a large cap. So Father Seraphim gave this type of narrowness the term super-correctness, sometimes calling it correctness disease. He saw how it could have a strong pull on young people, both converts and Western-born native Orthodox. The new super-correct authorities, he observed, offer them some simple answers to complex questions, and that is very attractive to those a little uncertain or shaky in their faith. We know many converts who grasp at correctness like a baby's bottle, and I think they could save their souls better by being a little incorrect but humbler. With its modern, overly logical approach, the super-correct wing had set itself above the simple believing Greeks of the old school, and Father Seraphim perceived how their mentality was also foreign to that of long-suffering Russians. In a letter he wrote, one basic element seems lacking in all their quote-unquote wisdom, one which the Holy Fathers emphasize is essential for genuine Orthodox life: suffering. The wisdom, quote-unquote, born of leisure and idle disputes is not worth having, but the wisdom born of deep suffering, such as God has given above all to the Russians of our day, is alone truly balanced and sound, even if it cannot give a glib answer to every mocking question. Let us try to enter more deeply into this suffering, God giving us his grace to do so. So suffering as the indication of the true path, and like a hallmark of the right approach, rather than a comfortable disputatious approach. One of the quote-unquote simple answers provided by the super-correct contingent concerned the relations of the various Orthodox churches. These people maintained that all churches on the new calendar or involved in ecumenical activities were quote-unquote heretical and quote-unquote invalid, that they were no churches at all, that their bishops were pseudo-bishops, and that they had no grace in their sacraments. Some of the leading priests of the new faction, before being received into the Russian church abroad, had been ordained by one of these new calendar churches, the Greek Archdiocese of America. These priests had a whole theory worked out whereby the Greek Archdiocese, due to ecumenical activities, had supposedly lost its grace sometime after they had been ordained. Unfortunately, one of the priests had a brother who was still a priest in the Greek Archdiocese. During a visit to Platina, he told Father Herman, "I certainly don't pray for my brother," meaning that he would not pray for him when the Orthodox are commemorated during the Divine Liturgy. Astounded, Father Herman went to tell Father Seraphim. "Can you imagine?" he asked. "He's talking about his own blood brother, ordained by the same bishop as he." Father Seraphim blinked his eyes with astonishment. "Well, it certainly is correct," he said with a sigh. When the Orthodox Word published an appeal from the poverty-stricken Orthodox Church in Uganda, which was in desperate need of food, clothing, spiritual books, icons, etc., another of the super-correct priests wrote to the fathers inquiring whether these African Orthodox were, quote-unquote, indeed brethren. This priest maintained that if they belonged to a new calendar, allegedly graceless jurisdiction, which in fact they did, they should not be helped. I would rather donate whatever I can to some worthy Orthodox family or organization, he concluded. How can we combat this cold-hearted elitism? Father Seraphim asked on reading this letter. This super-correct view of grace, or rather gracelessness, caused many problems for the Russian Church abroad. The faction's leaders were representing to people, especially impressionable converts, that the bishops of the Russian Church abroad considered this church virtually the only Orthodox body left in the world, most of the others being graceless. As Father Seraphim observed, however, our bishops refused to define this matter and make everything black and white. And I am sure that, perhaps without exception, our bishops not only refuse to declare them without grace, but positively believe, at least by giving them the benefit of any doubt, that they do have grace. Many of these hierarchs had spoken powerfully against ecumenism, Sergianism, etc., but they had not formally broken communion with any church save the Moscow Patriarchate, and even there they had not presumed to proclaim it without grace. As Father Seraphim wrote elsewhere, the bishops of the Russian Church abroad, on various occasions, have specifically refused to make such a proclamation. And in their statement at the 1976 Sobor, they specifically addressed the sincere and struggling priests of the Moscow Patriarchate in terms reserved only for priests who possess and dispense the grace of God. Going to Greece, the super-correct faction tried to create political ties between the Russian Church abroad and the most extreme of all old calendar groups, the Matthewites, who believed that not only were all the new calendar churches without grace, but any church that had anything at all to do with them was also graceless. This plan later backfired, for the Matthewites learned that, contrary to what they had been led to believe, the Russian Church abroad was far too liberal for them. In 1976, the English-speaking Orthodox mission was also struck a blow when people, mostly insecure converts, who had been baptized in other canonical Orthodox churches, were directed by the super-correct contingent to get rebaptized in the Russian Church abroad. Recently, Father Seraphim Rose, some wished to see such a rebaptism performed in our Western American diocese, but our Archbishop Anthony wisely refused to allow it, in which we gave him our full support. For indeed, it would have been tantamount to an open declaration of the absence of grace in the Greek Archdiocese. Bishop Nektari was alarmed to hear of this unprecedented practice. Perhaps the second baptism, he remarked, washes away the grace of the first one. At the height of the correctness mania in 1976, Father Seraphim explained to one convert why his path would not be with this type of zealotry. Their strictness, he wrote, forces them to become so involved in church politics that spiritual questions become quite secondary. I know for myself that if I would have to sit down and think out for myself exactly which shade of zealotry is the correct one today, I will lose all peace of mind and be constantly preoccupied with questions of breaking communion, of how this will seem to others, of what will the Greeks think, and which Greeks, and what will the Metropolitan think. And I will not have time or inclination to become inspired by the wilderness, by the Holy Fathers, by the marvelous saints of ancient and modern times who lived in a higher world. In our times especially, it is not possible to be entirely detached from these questions, but let us place first things first. In another letter he wrote, "We who wish to remain in the true tradition of orthodoxy will have to be zealous and firm in our orthodoxy without being fanatics, and without presuming to teach our bishops what they should do." So that's helpful. In another letter he wrote, I'll read it again, We who wish to remain in the true tradition of orthodoxy will have to be zealous and firm in our orthodoxy without being fanatics, and without presuming to teach our bishops what they should do. Above all, we must strive to preserve the true fragrance of orthodoxy, being at least a little not of this world, detached from all the cares and politics even of the church, nourishing ourselves on the otherworldly food the church gives us in such abundance. So, yeah, I think in Father Seraphim, you get this balance between this love for the tradition and zeal, but a realization that if you focus too much on these things, you're going to lose peace of mind. And most of the time, you're not going to be able to change things anyway. And if you are able to change things, and this is me talking, not Father Seraphim, although probably somewhere he says similar things, even if you are able to make a change, is it God working through you, or is it your own will forcing your opinion down the throat of another person? So, yeah, this is one of many wonderful things about Father Seraphim is his balance and his love for the tradition, but at the same time, his desire to put first things first and to love and to not be judgmental. There were times when Father Herman feared that the super-correct group was actually powerful enough to set the tone for all the converts coming to traditional Orthodoxy in America, and particularly to the Russian Church abroad. But Father Seraphim, although it hurt him to watch people being captured by this extremism, was not convinced. Quoting Abraham Lincoln, he told Father Herman, "It is true that you may fool all the people some of the time. You can even fool some of the people all the time. But you can't fool all the people all the time." Judging from the way things were going, Father Seraphim predicted that the super-correct group would eventually stage a schism and end up as a narrow, isolated sect of its own. In his letters over the years, he stated this many times. And I'll read that, but that is, in fact, what happened to that group in Boston. They are very much on their own. So Deb writes, "I don't know a thing about Father Seraphim Rose. I had no one to help prepare me properly to enter the Orthodox Church. I stick to St. Gregory Palamas and Elder Joseph." Well, they're wonderful fathers to read as well. So Father Seraphim is wonderful as well. Some people really like him, some people not so much, but I think God provides the things that we need when we need them. So, yeah, I'm glad you found your way, Deb, to Orthodoxy without the help that you needed. It sounds like God provided regardless. So in his letters over the years, Father Seraphim stated this many times. Here's a letter from June 15, 1976. "The quote-unquote right wing of Orthodoxy will probably be divided into many small jurisdictions, quote-unquote, in future, most of them anathematizing and fighting with the others. We must keep up the living contact with the older Russian clergy, even if some of them may seem to us a little too, quote-unquote, liberal. Otherwise, we will be lost in the zealot jungle which is growing up around us." And then from another letter in 1980, July 8th. "We ourselves have felt for some time that Father Blank and others who share his attitude are heading straight for a schism, which now seems almost inevitable if he does not change his direction. Such a schism nobody needs. There are so many groups of quote-unquote correct Orthodox in Greece now, none in communion with the others, that a new group will only prove the devil's power to divide Orthodox Christians." And then from a letter, October 27, 1980. "I look with pain and sadness on this whole situation, but I am powerless to do anything about it. The inevitable schism, which they are now preparing, if they don't change soon, will be the last step in a process which only they can change. And from the next year, Deb, the Greek Archdiocese, Deb says the Greek Archdiocese is the worst. They are on their way into communion with Rome. Yeah, well, Deb, I would encourage you to listen to what Father Seraphim Rose is saying, which is not to judge and to let our bishops do their job and to pray for them rather than judging. There are some of the best priests in the country are in the Greek Archdiocese, in my opinion. There are wonderful priests in every jurisdiction, but there are wonderful, wonderful priests in the Greeks and wonderful monasteries. All of Elder Ephraim's monasteries are in the Greek Archdiocese. Mount Athos is directly under the Ecumenical Patriarch. So I don't think we probably know more than they do or have better judgment about things than they do. So it's probably spiritually wise to, yeah, Eric, yeah, sure. You're not alone. There are a lot of people that feel that way, but I don't think it's a wise stance to be in a place of judgment. And when Mount Athos and Elder Ephraim's monasteries make a change, then I'll take it seriously. But until then, I'd rather not be judgmental. The fruit is bitter, and it's easy to lose our way, I think, if we set ourselves up as the judges of our bishops and priests. We should be very, very, very wary of that. And I think Father Seraphim Rose, that's what he's writing about. So September 17, 1981. Judging from the last outburst, the schism is close, and I'm afraid the silent majority of our priests and laymen will only heave a sigh of relief when the troublemakers are gone, leaving behind them a bad harvest of ill will and continuing their name-calling and hatred in a louder tone from their new quote-unquote jurisdiction. May God preserve us from all of this. Please forgive my frankness, but I feel the time is very late, and anyone who can do anything had better do it now. I know God will continue to preserve his church, and I believe he will prosper the true Orthodox mission, which is just beginning in our church. But the tragedy of souls caught in a self-willed schism will be incalculable. December 8, 1981. How tragic that some are now leading their flocks, albeit still very small flocks, out of communion with the only people who can still teach them what orthodoxy is and help them to wake up from their fantasies of a super-correct orthodoxy that exists nowhere in the world. Not long after Father Seraphim's repose, his prediction unfortunately came true just as he had written. All this will pass like some horrible nightmare, Father Seraphim remarked in a letter. Looking back at his support of the super-correct group in previous years, he wrote, "We feel ourselves badly betrayed. All these years we trusted that they were of one mind and soul with us, giving everything they had for the cause of the English-speaking mission. But really it seems that all this time they were only building for their own glory, cruelly abusing the true trust of our simple Russian bishops, priests, and laymen. We fear that all our articles about zealotry in the past years have helped to produce a monster." Of course, there was disillusionment on both sides, the leaders of the new party having been inspired to take up the zealot position in the first place, largely thanks to the Platina Fathers, assumed that the Fathers would naturally join their movement and begin to take their directives from the Boston monastery. Some of them were truly disappointed when it became clear that the Fathers were not going to follow their line. They had thought that Father Seraphim wanted absolute strictness just like they did, but in this they were wrong. Father Seraphim wanted truth, which is on a deeper level altogether. They have built a church career for themselves, Father Seraphim wrote, on a false but attractive premise that the chief danger to the church today is a lack of strictness. No, the chief danger is something much deeper, the loss of the savor of orthodoxy, a movement in which they themselves are participating even in their strictness. Strictness will not save us if we don't have any more the feeling and taste of orthodoxy. During the last, and I guess I will say this too, I don't know where people are at, obviously, but in order to get the feeling and taste of orthodoxy, to understand the savor of orthodoxy, it takes a long time. One doesn't get it when one becomes Orthodox immediately. One has a little bit of it, but one has a lot more of one's past, the baggage that one brings with one, which is understandable. That's just natural when one becomes Orthodox. It's going to take years, decades probably, before one actually understands Orthodoxy properly and understands what things are most important and what things are less important. And you can't understand those things, you can't learn those things if you begin from a position of judgment as knowing better than one's priest and one's bishop. If that's the position that you come into Orthodoxy with, then there's nothing to teach you. So it's a dangerous stance to take, even though I'm not saying there aren't problems in the church, but we're not called to fix them. God will take care of his church, and we're called to be faithful and to support our priests and bishops, and that to the extent that we can, be faithful. But we are there is a hierarchy for a reason, and there is an order to things, and trying to circumvent that order early on, especially, I think is dangerous. And this is what Father Seraphim Rose is talking about, I think. During the last decade of his life, Father Seraphim poured an incredible amount of time and energy into the question of super-correctness, having to uphold the Orthodox consciousness handed down from his fathers against the many idiosyncrasies of the neo-traditionalist theology. Not only were articles needed, but also carefully thought out answers to the many who came to him wondering about the new tone that was being set in the church. Looking back on this, one might be inclined to regard it as a waste of time. These were, in Father Seraphim's words, college boys playing at orthodoxy, trying to prove they were tougher than everyone else. They were not sensitive thinkers like Father Seraphim, and were not in the least interested in what he had to say if it did not accord with the party line. I saw your note, Eric. If you're still around when I finish, I'll try to get to it. There's like a page and a half left, so I don't know exactly what you said, but I will get to any comments that anyone wants to leave. Several considerations, however, lead one to conclude that his time was not wasted at all. First of all, as Father Seraphim was acutely aware, souls were at stake in this matter. For in leading people into schism from the church, the super-correct faction was blocking off their means of salvation. A number of people, Father Seraphim wrote, have already left our church in anger, and I see others evidently preparing to go the same way. Our warnings on this subject in the Orthodox word are meant to save as many people as possible from this suicidal step. Some dangerous signs. Just recently, the priest of blank church in blank told two of my spiritual children, whom I had sent there, that our Russian bishops are betraying him by their quote-unquote ecumenism. Quote-unquote betraying him by their quote-unquote ecumenism. Another Greek priest has told his flock that soon they will again be without bishops because they will have to leave the Russian church abroad. Another clergyman openly calls some of our bishops heretics. The perils about which we are warning are not imaginary, not at all. So, dangerous signs. Two of my spiritual children, whom I'd sent there, told him that the Russian bishops are betraying them by their ecumenism, and they start calling their bishops heretics. So this is Father Seraphim's warning that obviously this is a terrible, terrible thing. Secondly, we should consider the effect that this matter had in rounding out Father Seraphim's message to the modern world. As we have seen, super-correctness, and not always in the obvious forms mentioned above, is a big temptation for Orthodox people of these latter times, when the love of many grows cold. Indeed, correctness is built into the very word orthodox, which means right worship. A key question for our days, which Father Seraphim had to face, was, how does one remain a right Orthodox believer without becoming self-righteous? It was because Father Seraphim had a head-on collision with correct, quote-unquote, extremism that he was able to help his contemporaries out of this ditch. If he had not had it, it is likely that his writings would have proved one-sided. Even if he had avoided this pitfall himself, his words would not have been able to prevent less balanced individuals from going off the deep end on the right side. As it stands now, however, his message to people of today is full of sobering warnings against renovationism on the right, as well as on the left, against legalism and loveless externalism under the guise of quote-unquote traditionalism. Anything outward, he had said, can become a counterfeit. Anything outward can become a counterfeit. Finally, we should not neglect to mention the value of all this on the formation of Father Seraphim's own soul. He himself had been a convert to quote-unquote zealot orthodoxy, and it was necessary that he go deeper into the phenomenon of zealotry, which by itself was not the answer. By dealing with it, and even more by suffering over it throughout many years, he had been forced to eradicate vestiges of cold elitism from his Christian faith, even while maintaining his devotion to the cause of quote-unquote true orthodoxy. As he wrote in a letter, I think in all of this, despite appearances, God is helping us to a deeper, truer Christianity. So much of our orthodoxy today is so self-righteous and smug, or at least lukewarm and comfortable, that we need to be shaken up a little. May God only grant that his sheep not be lost. And in another letter, deep down, I do hope that we will suffer through this whole problem, and that the deeper heart of our church will make itself known in the end. In this suffering, Father Seraphim was able, as we shall see, to achieve that rare combination of an uncompromising stand for truth and a warm, living orthodoxy of the heart. Such is what makes all the difference between experts of dead traditionalism and true carriers of living tradition, such as Archbishop John of Shanghai and San Francisco. So that is Super-Correctness, chapter 63. I think probably I said everything that I wanted to say about it as we went through. I guess in summary, I wish there was more of a teaching aspect to the chapter. I'll have to think about it. Kind of what kind of criteria can be extrapolated. Hello, Philippe. Because I think it's really important. I think it's really, really, really important because it's a great temptation. It was a temptation 40, 50 years ago when he wrote this, and it's even a greater temptation now. As politics and the spirit of the world comes into the church, there's obviously a temptation on the left in a lot of ways that's a lot more obvious. What's less obvious is the temptation on the right. And zealotry, zeal not according to knowledge, is a danger. And I think a spirit of judgment and a lack of love, especially a judgment of our priests and bishops. We need to ask ourselves, are we praying for our priests and bishops? Do we have pain of heart for them and for the burden that they bear? Or do we just have a spirit of judgment because they aren't doing the things that we want them to do? And I think, yeah, God provides us with opportunities to be faithful and long-suffering. And like I said, when Mount Athos decides to do something different, when Elder Ephraim's monasteries decide to do something different vis-a-vis their bishops, then I'll take that seriously. But until such time, I certainly am not in a position to judge my priest or my bishop. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. Sacrifice, yeah, thank you. Philip, the sacrifice of to God are a broken spirit, a broken contrite heart, oh God, that will not despise. Eric, aren't some things obvious though, like mandating wearing masks and limiting those who can attend the divine liturgy? Isn't that obviously a loss of the savor of orthodoxy, even without years of being Orthodox? No, I wouldn't say that is an obvious loss of the savor of orthodoxy. And I don't know how long you've been Orthodox, but maybe in 10 or 15 years, you will understand that. I think it was a pastoral concern, and each bishop, some bishops maybe made mistakes, and let's pray for our bishops that the mistakes that they made will be forgiven them, and that next time they can make better choices. But what those better choices are, I don't know. I'm not in California. I'm not in New York. I'm not in St. Petersburg. I don't know what those bishops are dealing with. I don't know their flock. And so I think it was a pastoral decision. And we need to let our priests and bishops be pastors. And we need to learn how to be sheep and be obedient. And at some point, like I said, keep an eye on the monasteries. If Mount Athos decides to break communion over something, or the monasteries in America, then we'll have moved to a different place. But until such time, this is just it's a distraction, it's a temptation, and putting yourself in a position of judgment over your priest and bishop, or any priest and bishop, is spiritually, like Father Seraphim said, is spiritual suicide. Putting yourself outside of communion. So, like Father Seraphim said, sometimes it's better to be wrong, but to be right in the spirit than to be right according to the law. And you can take that too far, of course. But there's a balance that's important. And Father Seraphim, I think one of his great gifts is that he was so balanced. But like I said, there is a danger on the right, and it's hard to see. Because, as he said, there is a sense in orthodoxy of the truth, and so you can kind of justify a certain hardness and judgment. Alif Zahir, I'm a convert and would prefer a Rokor church, but my only option for getting baptized where I'm at is at a Ukrainian church parish, and I know nothing about them, and I've heard weird things. Any advice? Well, feel free to send me an email, Alif. It's difficult. I don't know. There are different Ukrainian groups, certainly, and some are canonical and some are not. So I don't know your particular situation, but what I would say generally is that if it's a canonical church, then unless there's a really good reason for you not to go there, it sounds like that's where God has allowed you to find your way into Orthodoxy. And there's a bloom where you're planted. I think that's a modern version of something that the Desert Fathers would say, and I think there's something to that. Sometimes there is a reason to go somewhere else, but I would do that very, very with very great caution and with fear of God, because so someone who's guiding themselves is going to end up probably falling into a pit. And so if God has guided you somewhere, then unless there's a really good reason to go elsewhere, maybe there's something there that you're supposed to learn, and something there that God needs from you. So yeah, anyway, like, I don't know your situation. Feel free to send me an email, and if I can be helpful, I'd be happy to be. But I certainly, going to a ROCOR parish isn't necessarily going to be the answer to all of your problems. ROCOR is great. I have lots of friends who are in ROCOR, and ROCOR priests who I love, monasteries that I love. But there are problems in ROCOR as well. And there, like I said, some of the best priests in the country are in the Greek Archdiocese. No question in my mind that that's true. Some of the most spiritually mature and holy priests are in their Greek Archdiocese. So you can find them, and you can find problematic priests in ROCOR for sure. So Deb, I attend a ROCOR mission. My advice is to do your research. Yeah, well, knowledge is good. Head knowledge is good, but it's also good to try to. God will provide. He's not going to leave us without direction, and so. On that note, I think I'm probably going to call it a night. I hope something there was useful. I hope I didn't say too many times. I'll have to go back and watch this. I'm sorry again for the portrait mode. YouTube forced me into it. Somehow the live stream started in portrait mode, even though my phone was in landscape mode. And we ended up here. So anyway, thanks for joining me. Blessed beginning of Lent. Blessed cheese fair. Good strength. Pray that you'll remain strong in the Lenten fast and Lenten struggle, and that it will be a fruitful, spiritually fruitful time. So, yeah, we'll see you again, God willing, in about a month. So take care. Good night.